I want to talk a little bit about Zionism because I've been looking at some of the history of Zionism. And I just took a few notes here. Back in 1820, my God, that's about not long after the founding of America. Back in 1820, a guy named Mordecai Noah tried to set up a Zionist homeland for the Jews in New York, on Grand Island in New York. He tried to set up what would be called the homeland for the Jews. It didn't work. So in 1903, British colonial secretary Joseph Chamberlain, he suggested to the Zionist Theodore Herzl, this is 1903, a homeland for the Jews would be perfect at Mau Plateau, it's M-A-U Plateau, in Kenya, Africa. And the idea was put forth called the Uganda Program. The British colonial secretary said a great place for the Jewish homeland would be in Africa, in Kenya. Well, that didn't work, so they move on. And 2 years later, in 1905, a large group of angry and frustrated European Jews formed an organization called the Jewish Territorialist Organization, the aim of which was stated by the founders as to just find and establish a Jewish homeland on the earth somewhere. But that didn't work either. Then in March of 1928, then in the Soviet Union, it was suggested that in the Russian Far East, in an area called Komzet, K-O-M-Z-E-T, near the Amur River, A-M-U-R River, there could be a perfect homeland for the Jews, that all the Jews could come to the Soviet Union, to the Far East section of the Soviet Union, and set up their own homeland there. And this was because Joseph Stalin loved the Jews so much that he wanted to have a new communist homeland for the Jews. And it was called the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, O-B-L-A-S-T. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast that Joseph Stalin, he called it the Soviet Zion, a wonderful communist homeland for the Jews, but after a while that didn't work either, so that fell through. In fact, earlier in the Soviet Union, around another idea was suggested for a homeland for the Jews could be placed in the Crimea or the Ukraine area. But the Ukrainians were not impressed or interested, so that fell through too. And then it was revealed in 1979 book called the Fugo Plan, spelled F-U-G-U. The Fugo Plan was the name of the book, and in it, allegedly talked about 1934, Japan allegedly offered a place in Japan for Zionism to have a homeland for the Jews in Japan. Well, that didn't work out very well at all, so forget that. Then in 1938, Hitler's Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, came up with a new idea to form a new Zionist state off the coast of Africa, East Africa. All the Jews that they could find would be sent to the island of Madagascar. But that, of course, that didn't work out either. So we move on. Then in 1940, in the UK, the British thought that they could build a Zionist homeland for the Jews in British Guyana, which is today just Guyana. But after thinking about it for a while, they said, forget it, it ain't going to work, so that's it. Then in 1930, another brilliant idea was suggested by a British Zionist League. It's called the British Zionist League, that the idea was that in the Kimberley region of Australia, there would be a perfect place for the Jewish homeland in what they call the Kimberley region of Australia. Mm-hmm. And that was open to the Jews to have their homeland there. But after thinking about it for a bit, the Australian government said, no, I don't think so in our backyard, so forget it. So that fell through. Shortly afterwards, the Prime Minister of Tasmania, Robert Cosgrove, he came up, the Premier of Tanzania came up with a dazzling, brilliant idea. He suggested a homeland for the Jews in an area called Port Davey area of southwest Tasmania. But he died immediately after bringing up the subject. He died, and everyone said, forget it, it's a bad idea anyway, so that That didn't go anywhere. Then finally God steps in to save the Jewish homeland for the Jews. God's chosen people finally got the help from God that they needed, for their homeland. And so his name was Baron Rothschild, of the satanic Illuminati fame. So Rothschild called them one of his male whores named Lord Arthur Balfour, appointed him to be the chief butt kisser in the British Israel Illuminati. And so the rest is history. Then today we have Rothschild and Balfour went to play in their favorite sandbox called the UN. And they came up with a great idea for a homeland for God's chosen people. And the idea was as simple as it was brilliant. They said, well, where would ancient Israel, if it ever existed, which in point of fact that was I was going to talk about tonight, it never did exist. There was no ancient Israel on the earth, period. But the idea Balfour and Lord Rothschild came up with is if there was an ancient Israel, where would it have been? And they said, well, obviously it would have been in the Middle East. They said, okay, then let's go to the Middle East and find some people, who are docile, who have lived there, for all these thousands of years, never hurt anyone. Why don't we go in and pull, like Adolf Hitler did, a blitzkrieg? We'll pull into town at 3 o'clock in the morning with tanks and scare the hell out of everybody and kill anybody that gets in our way. And then we will scream in their faces that God gave this land to me. Why didn't they tell the other 14 places that they kept trying to get into that God gave this land to me? And so they just asked permission. Could we have found a homeland here? No, get going. And so 14 times later, they finally decided to go to the Middle East, and now they can say, God gave us this land is mine. Which, of course, the Palestinians were wondering, what the hell are you talking about? We've been there for 6,000 years, and nobody knows who you are. You're from Europe. So the bottom line is that Zionism is just a political movement that is designed to do one thing, and it hasn't got anything, and I want to make this clear, Zionism has nothing to do whatsoever with the Jewish people as a people. That's a whole nother story, is who are the Jewish people, and is there, in fact, a legitimacy to this whole idea of an ancient Israel? Well, in point of fact, no. Ancient Israel never existed. We know that scientifically now. There are too many good and intellectually honest professors, teachers, scientists in the state of Israel today, which are writing books, and more is coming out every day, saying that the history of the Jewish people and the ancient Israel was all invented, probably by the Knights Templars in the 9th, 10th, and 11th century AD in Europe. They came up with the idea that there was an ancient Israel and the ancient people of Israel and that Old Testament. And I now am completely convinced, because of what I've seen and talked to all the experts over the years, that the whole concept of an ancient Israel in the ancient Middle East was bull. Never happened. And so there are so many books. Here's what's important. There are so many books and authors coming out of the state of Israel today. They're writing books and giving lectures out on the web. You can go and listen to these lectures of the Jewish researchers, Jewish writers, academics, professors, etc., talking about there was no ancient Israel. It was dreamt up most likely in the 9th, 10th, 11th century AD in Europe. There was no ancient Israel. The whole thing is a story. But the reason why that story was put forth is because the Vatican wanted a legitimate foundation on which to build a world religion. And so if they wanted to build a world religion, the world we already got the Buddhas and all kinds of saviors. The Vatican realized that it needed a legitimate foundation on which to build their empire. And so the best way to do that is to show that Jesus came out of a civilization called ancient Israel. And so it wasn't the Vatican that was so holy. It was ancient Israel that was so holy. And the Vatican is carrying on the great work of the ancient Israel with the new Messiah. The bottom line is that the whole story of ancient Israel, and this is why the Zionists, who were concerned about a homeland for the Jews, went to about 14 different places before they finally decided to shout in somebody's face that God gave us this land, and this was my land, God gave it to me. It's ludicrous. It is absolutely on the face ludicrous that Zionism was designed to to provide a homeland for the Jews, when factually there never was an ancient Israel or an ancient Jewish people. There never was. And so when you start reading all of the reference books and listening to the lectures of all the guys coming out of Israel, what they're talking about is becoming overwhelmingly obvious that we have been lied to and set up a long time ago. And when you get into theology, I've been doing this for many years. I'm telling you, there is an extraordinary story of betrayal and lies that just once you begin to see the signs, it's so unbelievable that's why it works. It's so absolutely in your face unbelievable that nobody would believe it.